Break a little news on your program here that I spoke with a detective earlier today, and effective Monday, this investigation will essentially be moved to the task force entirely.
We've all acknowledged there's a ransom note. It appears to me that the investigators aren't 100% convinced it's legit.
A series of developments over the past several days has begun to shift the direction of the investigation into the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie. And some of those developments may ultimately change how authorities interpret the events of the night she vanished. Earlier this week, Tommaso Cioni was seen in public for the first time in quite some time. He appeared alongside Annie and Savannah Guthrie as the family approached the growing memorial outside Nancy Guthrie's home in the Catalina foothills. The appearance lasted only a few moments, yet it immediately drew widespread attention across the internet. Within hours, viewers began closely examining his height, posture, and the way he walked, comparing those details with the masked individual captured on surveillance footage outside Nancy Guthrie's front door. Side-by-side clips spread rapidly across social media as people studied the angle of his shoulders, the rhythm of his steps, and how his height aligned when standing beside Savannah. The debate has continued to circulate online, and we will return to that discussion shortly. But another development that unfolded during the same week may prove even more important, even though it has received far less public attention. On March 6th, FBI agents working alongside detectives from the Pima County Sheriff's Department returned to the Catalina Foothills neighborhood where Nancy Guthrie lived and began speaking directly with residents. What stood out was not simply the presence of federal investigators moving door to door, but the very specific question they were asking. According to several homeowners, agents were not focused on suspicious vehicles or unfamiliar faces. Instead, they were asking about Wi-Fi disruptions. Specifically, investigators began asking residents whether they experienced unusual internet interruptions during the early morning hours of February 1st, the same window of time when Nancy Guthrie is believed to have disappeared from her home. Several homeowners later told reporters that federal agents appeared focused on understanding whether any digital devices inside the neighborhood stopped communicating with the internet that night. According to those residents, investigators explained that a small number of people had already reported brief disruptions involving their wireless networks. At first, the reports sounded insignificant. Temporary internet problems happen in many neighborhoods and are often blamed on service providers or routine technical issues. But as agents began comparing those reports, they noticed a pattern that immediately raised new questions about what might have happened during those early morning hours. One homeowner living only a short distance from Nancy Guthrie's property said. He reviewed the recordings from his home security system after hearing investigators were asking about Wi-Fi problems. When he attempted to access the footage from the night of February 1st, something unusual happened. The video history for that time period simply was not there. The clips had not been overwritten, and there was no indication that the system had malfunctioned. Instead, the files appeared as if they had never been recorded in the first place. The homeowner explained that he had never seen anything like it before. His cameras normally captured activity throughout the night without interruption. Yet for that particular time frame, the recordings were missing entirely. What investigators found even more interesting was how the outage appeared to behave. Not every camera connected to the system lost its signal. Only the cameras positioned along the side of the home that faced toward Nancy Guthrie's property stopped recording. Cameras placed on the opposite side of the same house continued capturing footage normally during the same hours. All of the devices were connected to the same router, the same internet service provider, and the same electrical power supply. Under ordinary circumstances, if a home lost its internet connection completely, every camera and smart device would drop offline at the same moment. That is not what happened here. Instead, the interruption seemed to affect only devices facing in a specific direction. Cameras that had a clear line of sight toward Nancy Guthrie's home lost their connection, while cameras positioned away from that direction remained active. Investigators say that kind of pattern does not resemble a typical service outage. Internet providers occasionally experience disruptions that affect entire neighborhoods, but those outages usually impact every connected device equally. What investigators observed in this case looked more selective. To understand why this distinction matters, specialists working with the investigative team began reviewing how wireless signals can be disrupted. Many people are familiar with the idea of a Wi-Fi jammer. These devices interfere with wireless communication by flooding the surrounding radio frequencies with noise. Most home networks operate within the 2.4 GHz and 5 GHz frequency bands, and a powerful jammer overwhelms those channels so that devices cannot send or receive data. When that happens, security cameras, phones, and other wireless equipment suddenly lose their ability to communicate with the network. The effect can spread across an entire house or even multiple homes depending on the strength of the device. However, the evidence gathered in the neighborhood does not appear to match the behavior of a traditional jammer. Nancy Guthrie's own doorbell camera was still able to capture a short piece of video showing a masked individual standing near the front door. That footage was eventually recovered by investigators. If a powerful jammer had been operating close to the house, the camera likely would have lost connectivity before capturing any image at all. There is also another technical detail investigators are examining carefully. Data from Nancy Guthrie's medical device indicates that her pacemaker continued communicating with her mobile device for a period of time after the doorbell camera lost its connection. Those communications rely on Bluetooth signals, which operate within a similar portion of the wireless spectrum. In most cases, a device strong enough to disrupt Wi-Fi would also interfere with Bluetooth signals. The fact that those signals continued for several minutes afterward has led investigators to consider the possibility that whatever interfered with the cameras may have been more targeted than a general jamming device. As analysts continue reviewing the available data, they are now exploring other forms of wireless interference that could produce the type of disruption seen in the neighborhood. Some cybersecurity specialists believe the pattern may resemble a technique that allows individual devices to be disconnected from a network without disabling the entire system. That possibility has prompted investigators to examine whether someone near the property may have attempted to interfere specifically with certain cameras before approaching the house. Technology experts assisting investigators say there are several ways a person with moderate technical knowledge could interfere with a wireless network without creating a large-scale outage. One technique often discussed in cybersecurity circles involves sending commands directly through the Wi-Fi communication protocol. These commands can instruct individual devices to disconnect from their router even though neither the device nor the router intended to end the connection. Because the request appears to follow normal network rules, the system accepts it as legitimate traffic. The camera or device receiving the command simply drops offline. What makes this approach particularly difficult to detect is that it does not require overwhelming the radio frequencies with noise. Instead, it quietly tells certain devices to disconnect while leaving the rest of the network untouched. Security cameras located within range of the signal could be forced offline one by one, while other cameras on the same property continue recording without interruption. Specialists say this type of interference can sometimes occur when a device is positioned relatively close to the equipment it is targeting. Investigators reviewing the surveillance footage from Nancy Guthrie's porch have also focused on a small object visible on the masked individual captured by the doorbell camera. The person appears to have something inside a pocket with a thin antenna extending upward. Former investigators who have studied the footage have pointed out that the device could represent several possibilities. It might be a two-way radio used for communication, or it could be a piece of equipment capable of interacting with wireless signals. At this stage, authorities have not publicly confirmed what the object might be, but its presence has added another layer of interest to the digital evidence being analyzed. If the device were a walkie-talkie, it could suggest that the person outside the house was communicating with someone else nearby. That possibility would raise the question of whether another individual was positioned somewhere in the neighborhood acting as a lookout or waiting in a vehicle. Coordinated activity of that kind has appeared in other criminal investigations where suspects work together to monitor their surroundings. On the other hand, if the device was used to interact with wireless networks, it could indicate that the person approaching the property had prepared in advance to interfere with surveillance cameras. To better understand what might have occurred, investigators are now attempting to reconstruct the timeline of digital activity throughout the neighborhood. Detectives have begun collecting reports from homeowners about when their cameras stopped recording or when their networks appeared to disconnect. By comparing those times with data stored in routers and information maintained by internet service providers, analysts may be able to map the approximate range where the disruption occurred. Many devices capable of interacting with wireless signals operate only within limited distances, which means the person using such equipment would likely have been relatively close to the homes affected. Authorities are also reviewing additional surveillance footage from cameras positioned along nearby streets. Some of those cameras captured a vehicle moving through the area during the early morning hours. The vehicle was seen roughly 2.5 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home shortly after the time investigators believe key events may have occurred. Data from her pacemaker indicates that the device stopped transmitting signals at approximately 2:28 in the morning. Cameras farther away recorded the vehicle passing through an intersection around 2:36. Investigators say the drive between those two locations takes only a few minutes, which places the timeline within a range they are studying closely. Former law enforcement officials familiar with the Catalina foothills area say suspects sometimes choose locations they already know well. A person who lives or works nearby might naturally become familiar with the layout of streets, the locations of cameras, and the typical routines of residents. Someone with that familiarity could move through the neighborhood without drawing much attention. Their phone would also connect to local cell towers the same way it does every day, which could make their movements appear routine in certain forms of digital analysis. Another aspect investigators are exploring involves the data stored inside Nancy Guthrie's home internet router. Modern routers constantly detect signals from smartphones searching for available networks. Even if a device never connects to the network, it may still broadcast a small identifying signal while scanning for Wi-Fi. If a phone passed within range of the router during the early morning hours, it could have left a record that analysts may still be able to examine. Residents have also mentioned unusual activity involving animals during that same time period. One neighbor reported that their dog woke them during the night and repeatedly tried to go outside. When the dog was finally let out, the animal appeared focused in the direction of Nancy Guthrie's property. Investigators have not confirmed whether that behavior is connected to the events of the night, but some experts note that animals can sometimes react to sounds or movements that people might not immediately notice. Taken together, the digital evidence and witness reports have led investigators to believe that the individual responsible may have had some familiarity with the neighborhood and its surveillance systems. Detectives continue working through each piece of information as part of a coordinated effort involving both local authorities and federal investigators. Officials say their goal is to assemble every available detail into a clear timeline that explains what happened during the early morning hours when Nancy Guthrie disappeared. Savannah Guthrie has said that while she intends to return to her normal routine, the family is now facing the painful uncertainty surrounding what may have happened to Nancy Guthrie. More than anything, they continue searching for answers about where Nancy could be and what truly unfolded during the early morning hours when she disappeared. Investigators believe that the same digital systems that may have been interfered with that night could eventually reveal critical evidence. Every wireless device, home router, and mobile phone creates a trail of data that can sometimes remain long after an event occurs. By carefully analyzing those records, investigators hope to identify who was present in the area and piece together the sequence of events that led to Nancy's disappearance. Authorities are asking anyone who noticed unusual activity, internet disruptions, or unfamiliar individuals in the Catalina foothills neighborhood during that time to come forward. Officials say even the smallest detail could help move the investigation closer to answers.